So we've decided to call this On the Path, Yash. So welcome back for iteration number two of On the Path.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah, and today we're talking about something that's near and dear for us right now. Uh, it feels like connection is we're starving for it, especially men. And I know I'm starving for it. I want deeper connection in my life. I can really slip into loneliness, and it seems like it's not just me, that there's a lot of other men out there, people in general, but a lot of men who are having a really hard time with having intimate friendships, strong meaningful connection in our lives,
mhm.
and that loneliness feels epidemic. And there's a million directions we can go, but as I set the table here, this is a topic that we're fired up about. So why are you fired up about it? Why is this a meaningful conversation to be having with me right now?
Oh man, so many reasons. I also want to just take a moment to address on the path and how deeply that resonates at like a body level with me.
Mm,
Um, and I think it's relevant to this conversation, right? I think there's so many some of my thoughts here influenced by Dr. Vivek Murthy's words on the podcast that you shared, Mike, and just his writings in general. But there's such a grounding, I think, that we grow up in, a comparative grounding in
mm,
how we define our status and worth, right? And it's success is defined by a few metrics in Western society. It's how much money you have, how much notoriety you have, and yeah, it's wealth, notoriety, influence, and all of that, all of those metrics are comparative. And I think part of the reason that On the Path resonates so deeply with me is when I look at sources of influence, I don't often see a degree of vulnerability, especially with men, and in an acceptance of like I'm still figuring this shit out.
mhm,
And that's why On the Path resonates. And why I think it's so topical to this discussion that we're having here today is you and I are on the path. I don't
mhm.
think we're claiming to have figured anything out, period, right? And to have a philosophy. This really is a constant evolution of ideas that are circulating. And there's a state of confusion and ambiguity around it. And I think a vulnerability and humility in accepting that is the path. There is no state where
Mhm.
that goes away. There's no greener pasture where we have everything figured out and we're joyous all the time. And part of being joyful and part of the work is to accept that we're always on the path. So I just want to take a moment to make the linkage there. For me, it feels so profound.
Mm, mm. Yeah, this is if I ever claim to have it figured out, then like give me a
I'll
little
slap you.
virtual slap on the face or something, because that is never going to happen. And I at this point in my life and my development, if I ever seem to come across someone who is claiming that they're a guru or has figured out, or is coming across as, I'm up here and you're down there, that's very likely to be a red flag for me. I think there's a time and place to stand in as expert, as someone who knows, like a lot more about the subject matter. But I feel a lot. One of my gifts is vulnerability, my ability, and yours too, in my estimation. You shared really openly last conversation we had about what your childhood was like and things that you struggled with, and I think that that's incredibly more valuable, more healing, more connecting than learning how to, be perfect, be the best, be the most successful. We see, and we see that how empty that can be. People have all of the things, have all of the status, all of the fame, all of the money, good looking, good shape, blah blah blah. You can run off a list of all the accolades. And what I think all we really want, or what's foundational to be alive, is we want to connect with each other. We want to feel like we have people that we can really be our full selves with. And it's I think before we hit record, I was saying I have a really hard time with this, because I even with close friends, there's so much established. I don't know if it's bad habits or there's just so much conditioning around men uh talking about, first of all, not showing our emotions. So in my experience as a man, anger is acceptable. So like complaining about why your sports team sucks, or being, yelling at someone in traffic or whatever, is actually acceptable as a man in our current setup of society. But not, showing fear or sadness or shame or guilt or second guessing ourselves, not having it together in any way, is not, that is a very scary thing. That is not acceptable. And so for me, that makes me feel really disconnected a lot of times, because I am trying to, if someone asks me how I'm doing, I want to have this like knockout answer about how amazing my life is. And sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's not amazing, and I have a hard time sharing that with other people in my life. And then this interesting thing happens is then I feel shame that, yeah, I do inner work. I'm a coach, and here I am talking to someone I'm really close with, and I actually don't feel comfortable sharing what's happening in my life with them. I'm scared of how they might perceive me, and it's this kind of gnarly, vicious cycle. And I want to break that. I really do. I want to be able to, because I really believe that at our core, this is what we all want. We all want to be seen for who we really are. We want to put the mask down, the armor down, and to just be able to share. If life is great, then share that with someone. But also, if my life is not great right now, I want to be able to share that too.
Yeah, wow, so many things that resonate there. I think it a couple of things come to mind here. First is that it's completely possible to feel disconnected and isolated when you're surrounded by people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not this thing
Mm-hmm.
where we're on a desert island somewhere, and that's when loneliness and isolation and disconnection hit. I feel I resonate with so much of what you said, especially as a man. I think in Western society, there aren't there don't exist many spaces for us to be deeply intimate and vulnerable about what it means to be a man and masculinity. And oftentimes, vulnerability and openness and questioning around masculinity is viewed as feminine, and there's a toxicity around it. Um, and that is, I think, is one of the greatest disservices that we're doing to ourselves as men, right? In order to, it's stopping, it's hampering growth,
Mm-hmm.
in our ability to really fully be seen and expressed as ourselves, um, by isolating ourselves. And I think that the other interesting point that you bring up is the shame that's associated with that. I feel this shame in many different forms. There's I feel a shame associated with not being vulnerable and not being seen. So there's vulnerability is brave and courageous, as Brene Brown says. Um, I also feel shameful when I am vulnerable and
Mm-hmm.
intimate. And it really feels like there's no way to win in some instances, and so much of that is due to the toxicity around what it means to be a man, around comparing my situations to others. When you share something good that happens to you, I want to be able to take sympathetic joy and just embrace the
Mm-hmm.
goodness and have joy for you, right? As opposed to feeling the need to one up or compare myself. And I think especially as a man, growing up in an immigrant culture, I I've just been more and more aware of how much this isn't me, something core to me. I think there is a biological component to this, but so much of it is societal,
Mm-hmm.
where the ways that we're taught to, from a very young age, that we're taught to assess our own worth are through this comparative lens. So there's certainly a sex component to it. There's also this societal component. I was just thinking about how, do you remember in school how there was at some point, I think third grade, we branched off classes. There was sort of the gifted and talented class,
Mm-hmm.
and then there was, I don't know what the other like group of students was called, but like the other group of students, it's implied that they're not gifted and talented, right? Because they're in
Yeah.
different groups. And I remember being a kid and being in third grade, not really understanding what these two different things meant, but being so happy and taking pride in the fact that I was in the gifted and talented group.
Hmm.
And now looking back at that, imagine the damage that is done to a child that isn't selected in that group based on whatever standards that gifted and talented means. Um, Imagine the message that's being delivered to them. I mean, we don't have to imagine it. The message is like, oh, I'm not part of this group. And that's something that's a belief that's instilled at such a core foundational age to value your worth in these comparative terms. And there's connection and isolation in the fabric of our society, even with young children. Um,
Hmm.
and I was just, it really hit me how deep this goes. How it's
Hmm.
not just something that's like a choice. It's really something that we're taught.
Hmm. Hmm. It is really ingrained in like with sports and male culture. There's always there's a competitive nature to a lot of things, which is what it seems like. That's what I'm interpreting as what you're pointing to here, is that
Mm,
even from a young age we're split into, here's the, the special group, the more talented group, here's the less talented group. And that creates a lot of this comparative culture that you're talking about. Another thing that I was really struck by, that has been, it's resonated with me, and I need to hear it over and over and over again to remind myself, is that I can be with a lot of people. And as a matter of fact, a lot of times when I feel loneliest is when I am in a group of people and not feeling connected. So
yeah.
like I have lots of connections, and it's sometimes when I'm at a party and I don't feel like I'm making, a meaningful interaction with another person, that's actually when I feel my most lonely. And
Mm,
when I am in solitude, a lot of times I actually feel really connected. I can feel that I'm part of this giant system, this web of amazing humans and creatures. And yeah, I sometimes get images of being in nature. And so there's a difference between being alone physically and feeling lonely. That's been a powerful distinction for me. So yeah, I don't know where I wanted to go. I think I wanted to share a personal example because I think like stories can be really powerful. And
please.
there's a story that's coming up for me around, because I think this illustrates why we don't give ourselves permission to, let's say, cry when we're feeling really sad or wanting to grieve. I won't get into specifics, but there was a someone that I knew really closely who passed away early on in COVID. It was pretty sudden. It was an illness that happened over the span of maybe 6 months or so. And it was around Thanksgiving time when when he ultimately passed away from the illness. And I saw his wife for the first time, and yeah, she basically came into my arms, gave me a big hug, and started hysterically crying. And I held it. I wasn't crying when she hugged me, but I was so sad, man. I was grieving too. And I left that interaction, went back to my parents. There was company over at my parents. As soon as I got home and shut the door, I burst out hysterically crying. And I could see how visibly uncomfortable a lot of people who were in the room were, that a grown man was crying. And it was well intended, but someone said, oh, it's actually like really healthy for men to cry. It was to me, it was a way of deflecting how uncomfortable that person felt, that she was trying to
Interesting.
explain, like, oh, like I've heard it's really good for people to cry. And I don't think that if a well, I don't want to start getting into, women have a whole different set of challenges. And I think in most ways it's much easier to be a man in our culture. But in this way, like, showing sadness is way more okay in my estimation if I were a woman than for a man. And like,
I
if
agree
that
with that
if it
from my
happened at a young
experience. Yeah.
absolutely. If that happened to me at a young age, one story that I could have made up about that is, it's not okay to cry. And so many people have internalized that story. I know that for a fact, that as a man, as a boy, you're not supposed to cry. Toughen your shit up. Don't tell me that you've got that going on. Bootstrap it, get back out there. So I mean, that was definitely coming up for me in terms of ways that we internalize that it's not okay to show who I am, who we are as a gender, as really as an entire gender.
Yeah, wow, so much in there. And thank you for sharing that. And there's a couple experiences I think relate. Just the first, I think, is just a more general point around. I think, despite an intellectual acknowledgement, I don't think most reasonable people in our society would say it's not okay for a man to cry. I think most people would be like, it's completely fine. But there's still such a dissonance between
Mhm.
the intellectual understanding of that or the thought of it and the actual experience, which is something that you're hitting on. This is still it's still a brave act to be vulnerable in your masculinity in a way that isn't traditionally masculine. And there it makes people uncomfortable. I mean, hell, it makes me uncomfortable when I see it, and I'm working through my own response to that. There's layers of shame, and my own stories that need undoing there. I'll speak from the I here, right? And so, um, yeah, it really takes a tremendous amount of courage and bravery to to be vulnerable in your masculinity as a man, to express sadness and fear and shame and guilt, and these, what what I've been taught are expressions of weakness.
Mhm.
It also takes a tremendous amount of strength and bravery to hold space for other people doing that. And that's why I think these spaces for men to really be intimate and explore
Mhm.
masculinity that are not just supportive, also challenging in a healthy way, are so important, so needed in society. So one general point, one of the other things that really resonated with me, Mike, is I've recently learned about my own, uh, how comparison has really just pervaded so much of my own experience. Um, One of the things that I've been working through is I surround myself with people that inspire me.
Mm.
And it's, inspiration is only a short ways away from envy.
Mhm.
And envy has these two components to it. I think there's an admiration for someone or something, which is an inspirational, beautiful thing, right? An admiration. And then envy also has a craving attachment for that thing. And the sort of if then between admiration and envy for me is almost instantaneous and
Mm.
has been for most of my life. And it's been extremely challenging because it's been challenging for me to hold the space and celebrate the people that I love and admire, without feeling really envious. And I've started to be really open about that. Like, man, I feel envious and ashamed of that and ashamed of myself when I hear you tell me good things, and I don't want to feel that, right? But I
Mhm.
think even that opening there is a practice of vulnerability for me. And one of the other things that I think has been really core to me that I've learned is, you know, I was always celebrated, at work, at home. I was punished if I didn't succeed,
Mhm.
and mildly celebrated if I did. And at school, certainly celebrated for getting good grades or being good at things, right? Like being on the top. And now that's translated into this way of being in my life that I'm working through how to undo. But it's really like I feel a tremendous amount of anxiety, around doing new things that I know I'm not
Mhm.
good at or
Mhm.
that other people are better at. And so, I mean, this is like playing pickleball with my friends, playing chess, or like drawing or painting. I did date night with my girlfriend where we painted, and I was so unbelievably stressed out
Mhm.
because I was pervaded by all these feelings of perfectionism. Like, what does it mean if I can't do this? Like,
Mhm.
it has really severely limited historically my capacity to play, to engage in play, because I'm so focused on this comparative, competitive aspect of being good at something
Mhm.
that it precludes me from being in the moment. And I'd wager that's true for a lot of people. Um, and yeah, and that, that is something that, like, there's shame often has an attachment component to it. I didn't know that. The ways that we attach to other people can often be influenced, laced with shame, one, and two, have this comparative nature about them. And that was something. that's just something I've noticed a lot lately, and
Mm.
I've started to work through. Um, but yeah, let me pause there. That was a lot.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm thinking towards the second half of the conversation here. We've very it's well documented at this point that what the challenges are, and I'm wondering what do we think are ways that we can move forward. So I have one thing that I have found really helpful that I think could be, well, maybe let me just build a little bit of picture. I'll say what's helpful, and then I'll kick it to you. One thing that is missing is just any emotional literacy in the first place. So just teaching the skills of emotional intelligence, I think, has been really instrumental for me. So if something happens and I get angry at my wife, in the past, if I when I hadn't done enough of my work and haven't, and I still snap sometimes, I'm a human, but what I would do is get into some sort of like, I need to yank her to convince her that I'm right, instead of just expressing that I felt a little bit of anger. I'm noticing some anger coming up for me, or I'm noticing a little bit of fear around this thing. So just being able to build the emotional literacy, just and I think that it can be really helpful to stick with some basic emotions. So maybe joy, sadness, anger, fear, shame. Those are some good places to start. There's many subsets of different emotions, but usually we can bucket them into those kind of core emotions.
Yeah.
And if someone has emotional literacy, what I'm thinking of is creating space for an authentic check-in, whether it's at a work meeting or in a one-on-one call. Like you and I would love for this to start to be a more, we do this anyway naturally, but I think that we have established that rapport, that level of connection in our friendship. But an edge for me might be with friends that aren't in personal development work, to say, how do you feel about doing an authentic check-in where we just say one emotion that we're feeling right now? So are we feeling joy, sadness? You could feel multiple at the same time: joy, sadness, fear, anger, shame, excited, guilt. What are we feeling right now? And let's just create space for that. I have never done a check-in in my entire life. It might not feel good, but I've never done a check-in in my entire life where I didn't feel at least a little more grounded and connected, because it's authentically what's happening and I don't have to hide it, and it feels really good. So that's one thing. I want to bring this into the workplace a lot more too.
Yeah. No, I love it. I'm getting excited because I've been doing this recently on my teams. And one thing that I want to bring in here is I think vulnerability and courage and expressing with this level of openness can feel really challenging to the nervous system, right? I mean, I
Yes.
know when I first heard people talking this way and wanted to be vulnerable, I was freaking out.
Mhm.
I felt a ton of fear. It felt really dangerous to do that
Mm,
because that the
mm,
way that I moved about the world, the way that I saw success in the world wasn't by doing that. It was actively against that, and that was patterned into my body. So I think it's really important to remember that we can start small,
mhm,
and little things, little ways of repatterning these beliefs that vulnerability is bad or I am weak if I show emotion have profound effects. So the couple things that come to mind are the most common greeting that we give to each other is just like asking like what's up, right? And I know if I'm mindless, I'm just like, oh, nothing much, right? And you know, I've just started to try to be more intentional about, even with strangers,
mm,
to ask them how their day's going and really mean like if they're like, ah, it's fine, to just follow up with like, no, like really, I want to know how your day's going. And they usually follow up with a sentence or two. Sometimes they're like, yeah, it's fine. Sometimes they're like, you know what? Like it's actually been a tough day, or I'm having a wonderful day. And I do the same thing with anyone that I run into. If I have a moment to have an element of connection with someone, I really try to cherish that, even if it lasts for 2 seconds. They
mm,
ask me how my day's going. I'm more open about saying, you know what, it's been a tough day. Things aren't going my way today,
mm.
and that has felt, even that 2 second sentence has just created an opening for me to feel that it's okay to step into vulnerability. and it's safe, and it actually has created something beautiful, which is a meaningful moment of connection with someone. So I don't think it needs to be a
Yeah.
huge thing. It doesn't need to be this like expose of like telling your life story for an hour. It can just be these little moments of changing the ways that we interact with people. And one of the ways that I've tried to do this is, I think, especially in work meetings when we're working remotely, um, there's it's very easy to go from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting, to carry emotions with you that never get expressed. Just be to be working in the business as opposed to connecting with the people around you. And to your point around check-ins, one of the things that I do is just a simple red, yellow, green check-in with everyone. And
Mm.
the framing is, how are you showing up in this moment? Red, yellow, green. Red is awful. Green is amazing. And you can just say the color. You can also add in a sentence or two about how you're feeling. And it takes maybe 20 seconds. Yeah, I don't do it on every meeting. But the meetings that I do it on, it's really amazing how open people get when you just give them permission to be that way and also model vulnerability.
Mm. Man, I'm touched by everything that you just shared. And I want to sit with that for a second. I'm really inspired by the the invitation to start really small and to look at what I'm hearing is every interaction is a chance to really show up. And I'm getting images in my head of checking out at Trader Joe's or going to the grocery store. Every interaction there is some exchange. How are you? What's up? What's going on? I and there's nothing wrong with giving a throwaway statement. It's sometimes I'm not in the mood, and I want to give myself the grace to just be like I'm not ready to have a conversation right now, and that's okay. And I aspire to give that permission to other people too. But if there is any sort of space for both people wanting connection, I love the invitation to step in and say, here's what's really happening for me, and not like without boundaries spilling out my life story, but just an authentic. It hasn't been the best day so far for me. And I've been feeling a little bit stuck, but uh
Yeah.
yeah, it always brings me a little bit of joy to come to Trader Joe's, something like that. I
Yeah.
think that, like there's even that simple thing would there's way more possibility than being like, fine. And a lot of times I can hear when it's a fake. We're more perceptive beings than we give ourselves credit for. We can tell when someone's really authentically doing great and when someone's not. And it blocks the energy anyway to not authentically stand in that. So
Yeah.
this has been. Do you have anything else that you want to add here? I think that you're on fire right now, and I feel like it's already been an amazing conversation. And I don't know if I have much to add except maybe a further invitation that I want to make myself available if you're watching this right now and you don't feel like you have space for authentic connection in your life. I want the same thing. I'm hungry as shit for that. So let me know. Reach out to me.
But I'll make the same invitation. Yeah, I know that this is something that I was told, physically told, that as a child that it's not okay to do. It's not okay to authentically communicate with people and share uh, share painful emotions and when things aren't going well. And it's always important to wear a mask. So, I mean, honestly, if anyone wants to connect, I'm open for it too. I know we're both open to it. I'm sure we both love to talk to them. And I want to also hammer home that I think it helps me just as
Yes.
much uh, as it may hopefully help other people to do this. It helps me continue to repattern this. And I think the more that we take even little instances to really meaningfully connect with other people, and just I also want to add that one thing that I try to do is really sit with that. I feel it. So when I feel vulnerable and safe in my vulnerability, I feel this energy in my chest, in my heart,
Hmm.
and so I try to place a hand on my heart, which you may have seen me doing a couple of times in
Hmm.
this conversation,
Hmm.
as a reminder to my body that like, hey, this is safe to do. So yeah, it's a beautiful invitation. I obviously am here for it as well, and I just want to share it to anyone who's listening that it helps me just as much,
Yeah,
if not even more, as it may help you.
same here. Same here. The hunger is strong for this guy over here. So I love having those types of connections. They help me more than I imagine than anyone really. And
Yeah,
I do hand on my heart too, many times a day. I'm wanting to have a little bit more courage to just walk around outside when I'm feeling disconnected and just put my hand on my heart and not worry as much about what other people might be thinking about. So this was a beautiful conversation, Yash. We could talk. There's so many other layers that we could talk about here, and I think maybe it's for a future day. There's a level around embodiment, like where do we feel
mm,
these emotions in our body that we're starting to point to, and we can put a little bit of a pin in that. And I think that there's depth that we can go into as well around what are some spaces that we can create for these conversations to be enabled so that there's not
definitely.
so much pressure on the one individual to make these things happen, right? So like where can we just drop in and there's already a space that's safe for this type of connection that has been so helpful for me as I work through the wonky skills and kind of flail around learning about my emotions and say things that have been terrifying for my nervous system as well. And that's maybe a further part of the invitation slash things that we could talk about for another time. So I think maybe in closing here, I got my hand on my heart. Conversations like this help me feel so connected and connected to who I really am and the source of my vitality and my aliveness. And I'm so grateful for our connection, Yash, our friendship.
Me too, Mike. Me too. Yeah, ditto to everything you said. I couldn't have said it better. There's a lot more to dig into here. Um, and yeah, I think, at some point, just spitballing here, there's maybe a retreat or something, or some sort of space for uh, people that feel similarly,
Mm-hmm.
to come together, including you and me, to come together and engage in this type of open discourse, and really see like that it doesn't have to be the scary thing, and really can be quite beautiful.
Amen, brother. So until the next time, thank you, Yash, and thank you everyone for tuning in. Sending everyone lots of love.
Everyone, lots of love. See ya.